All right. Welcome to the Unscripted Creatives Podcast. I'm Brad Floyd, and this is my co host, Deanna Giron. Deanna, what is our tagline for today?
So, our tagline today, we still haven't chosen one, but today's tagline is talking about the stuff that creatives don't talk about.
I like that.
And my question for you guys today is, do you feel so distracted that it hinders your
Mm.
creativity? We're going to
Ooh.
talk about some things and how we can maybe set up ourselves better so that we can create.
Yeah, that's a really good topic. I love this question. Well, I think what are let's maybe what are some examples of some common challenges that creatives face in just maintaining focus? Like, what are those distractions? Yeah,
There are
what are
so
not
many.
those distractions is probably the better question.
Well, yeah, some of the distractions that I personally face are one, my environment. Um,
Mm,
Sometimes the space that I want to create in is not ready for me, or I
mhm,
allow other things or other people's things to end up in my space. And so
mm,
when I'm feeling those juices going,
mhm,
the space is so not ready for me. So
right.
that is one thing that I have to deal with. How about you?
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally resonate with that. And another one for me is just life. Like, I'm a father of three, and married, and I've got a job, and there's a lot of things happening in my life, and so I find that that's probably one of the biggest areas that impact just my ability to be creative on a regular basis.
Yeah, and another thing for me is, we talked about in the last episode kind of the psychological things and
Yeah,
filters,
yeah,
that we place on ourselves. And so one of the things that resonated with me in that last episode was what are the beliefs that I
mm,
have about my art, about my music, about myself as a
yeah,
musician. Like, what are those beliefs? And if I am not confident in myself and the skills that I have and the gifts that I have been given, if I'm not confident about that or really accepting of who I
mm-hmm,
am,
mm-hmm,
then the way that I approach my creativity or learning about or performing is approached differently, and a
absolutely,
lot of times can be approached with some hindrance or some, just kind of caution
yeah,
about we do need to take risk at times
yeah,
in this industry, and sometimes I will be risk averse because I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do that," or, "Oh, I don't know if I'm
right,
good enough for that."
right, yeah. Yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. So it sounds like to me we're talking about three different areas, right? We're talking about like kind of physical five sensory type distractions, which could be our desk, it could be the actual studio itself. The second one was like life in general and just like the circumstances around life, which probably includes relationships and stress levels and things like that. And then the third one is that thing we talked about last time, which is like what are the actual like biomechanical psychological things that are happening, and this gets into our beliefs about ourselves, our confirmation biases, and that's three, like I almost see them as three levels, right?
Mhm.
The strategies to kind of work with each level, I think, are different, so maybe we can talk through a couple of those, right? Like, what
Yeah.
to start, like what are some things you can do just um like your physical space, right? Like, how do you manage to how do you prep your physical space, I guess, would be a great example, a great question.
Yeah, so, I'm gonna be honest, I am not, like, I don't know, I'm a little strange, I guess you could say. I'm organized, but I'm not organized.
Yeah.
So, there are times where, like, my desk is super organized, it's
Mm.
clutter free, but then as I start creating, the clutter kind of comes
Yeah.
in, And after a
Same,
while when that
same.
clutter is there, yeah, we're clutterholics.
Yep.
Um so after a while when that clutter sets in, originally it may start out as my creative clutter, and then there are times where it ends up being my personal clutter. I
Yeah,
will
yeah.
tell everybody on YouTube and on this
Mhm.
podcast that, sometimes my laundry ends up on my desk
Works its
that I
way
need to
in,
fold
yeah.
and put away.
Right.
And then definitely I'm not in the creative mood to be making
Right.
something or doing something because my laundry is all over my desk. So
That's a very yes, that's very accurate. I feel like that's a very common experience. I had a good friend of mine who was a painter, and her studio. I had a conversation about her studio one time, and she was talking about how she'll organize it, get all her paints and her brushes and everything, canvases, easel, all that stuff, lighting. These are all kind of really important. And then she'll go on this stent where she'll maybe do that every few months, but between the cleaning sessions, the organizing sessions, it's kind of like I always refer to it as like a tornado of creation,
yeah.
because the space, and I think this happens in music, it happens in a lot of different creative spaces where your space is really a reflection of you. It's there's a symbiotic relationship between you and your space, especially when you get into the really physical arts, music creation, pottery, like crafts, like actual physical goods, right? Like if you're creating or painting or anything like that, weaving artists, like tapestries, all kinds of stuff, right? These environments are just as much a part of the creation process as you are. In fact, in a lot of ways you couldn't create without them, right? So um so it's very natural for the environment to be physically affected, not only by you and the energy you bring in and the way you create, but also the actual process of creation, right? Like,
Yeah.
like paint gets on the floor, and clay gets on the wall, and the pot on the clay will exploded a little bit, and so there's clay everywhere. Like I think that it's actually kind of a product, like a beautiful product of creativity, is that kind of messiness and
Messiness.
chaos that comes out of it, and I love that. I've always loved that. The on the life side, right? On the kind of situational life side, these are our relationships, right? These are the stability, emotional stability in a house, maybe, or of the people you're working with. Like if someone is having a really hard time in life because of a situation or relationship, and you're trying to be creatively productive, right, as a team, a lot of times, in most cases, like I think I bring in that stuff with me. Like if I'm feeling
Oh,
bad
for
or sad or
sure.
whatever, right? Like that's a real thing. And in a lot of creative environments that I've been in, we always try to kind of like have this like really cool, and we'll talk about this in a minute. It's one of our takeaways, but it's like a moment, a set aside time to kind of check in with everybody who's in the space, including if it's just you by yourself, right? Like, so we'll include that in our takeaways in a minute. So
Yeah,
that's a way
I
to
actually
acknowledge.
oh, yeah, I actually had a situation where there
Mm,
was a point where my husband and I'm also married, have 3
mhm.
kids. If you don't know, Brad and I are neighbors. We
We
live
are.
right around the corner from each other. I consider Brad my family, as I say.
Yeah.
His
Mhm.
kids are like my kids. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great. But there was a time where I had a gig and I was performing, and before that gig, my husband and I had a fight. And
Mhm.
so, we kind of left that, and so I left with
Right.
that kind of like feeling and that energy.
Right.
And so when I went to my gig, I was singing with someone, and the whole night, like, I knew, like, it was off, and I think
Mm.
he couldn't quite put his finger on it, but I didn't wanna talk about it because 'cause I'm like, "If I
Right.
talk about it, then, I mean, the
Right.
whole thing is just gonna, like, derail." So
Right.
I was, like, trying to, like, hold myself together during this whole time,
Mm.
and it wasn't until afterwards, and then, like,
Mhm.
after he left, I'm like, "I'm sorry, I had a fight with my husband, that's why things were kinda off a little bit,"
Right.
so when you have life and things that are going on, that
Mhm.
definitely
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
affects your creativity. Or like I'm
Yeah,
playing at the
yeah.
piano and I'm trying to practice, and my piano is in my great room, which means that the dining room is there, the living room is there, the
Right,
kitchen is on the other
right.
side. It's one big open area.
Yeah.
And I have 3 kids as
Yep,
well, and
yep.
they love asking me questions and they love talking to me and
Right,
telling me all
right.
kinds of things, which I
'Cause you're
love.
awesome.
Thanks.
Right, right.
Which, I love that they are so open with me, but there are times I'm just trying
Yeah,
to practice
yeah.
and they're like, "Hey, did you know that blah, 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 blah? Or have you seen da, 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 da?"
Right,
And I'm like,
right, right.
"Uh, uh." And
Yes.
it's just like I have to be okay with,
Yeah.
because my family is important to me,
Mhm.
that I do still want my boys to talk to me about
Right.
anything, that I have to go in
Mhm.
there and be like, "Okay, my kids are home.
Yeah,
I'm going to be practicing. I must be ready for disruptions
yeah,
because they will
yeah.
disrupt me while I'm playing, and
Absolutely.
I need to set that intention so that I'm
Mhm.
okay with it and know
That's right.
that that's going to happen, and then I
That's
don't
right.
feel frustrated because I'm like, "I can't get this done." I have to
That's right.
know the
That's right,
situation I'm
yeah.
walking into.
Yeah, that's really important. And disruptions happen, interruptions happen. Definitely, like especially when you're in a creative flow and things are really flowing. We've got to build up our ability to kind of deal with these disruptions, right? Because they will happen. Distractions happen. It's part of life. It's a part of how the universe works. Being able to roll with those punches, right, and give you yourself and the situation grace, right, to be able to keep
Mhm.
your momentum um, uh, has a lot to do with like the expectations we set and we place on ourselves. So this is actually a really great segue to the third area, right? Which is about our own beliefs about ourselves. What expectations and beliefs are we putting on ourselves? And that happens well and beyond and before the creative space, right? There are also maybe create beliefs about your own creativity that are probably really key, but this is where we get into the really deep end, and I think any creative out there who's struggling with things like writer's block, right, or lack of momentum, right, or regret over not releasing or not writing or not doing this, these are symptoms of this third layer, which has to do with those beliefs. What are we carrying? How do we view our own creativity? This goes all the way back to things like relationship with parents. Were your parents really involved in your creativity early on? That spark that you had trying to bring, did you discover your creativity later in life? Was it very disruptive to everybody in your world? Like, there's so many possibilities and opportunities for our creativity to disrupt, right? And a lot of times we can hold on to that. It kind of becomes a little bit of a wound, that to kind of maybe limit us a little bit. So some of the takeaways I think for these are number one, we can do a quick check-in, right? No matter when we're becoming creative, no matter when we're going to a space to be creative, I think one of the most important things is to do that quick check-in with ourselves or with the people that are in our space with us, so
Mhm.
that like going back to your example, Deanna, when if you had a moment and the clarity in the moment to say to your co performer before y'all got started, hey, I need to share something with you that that I'm working through like right now, right? And just so I can voice it, right? And know that even if I don't have to go into it, I don't have to explain it. It's just, hey, this is something I'm processing. So that may have given him an opportunity to maybe pick up a little bit
Yeah.
more, to have that common bond with you, and to know that if he felt you kind of like dipping, or maybe that he would be able to like pick it up for you almost,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'd
Mhm.
love to know, like, think about that for a second. How do you think that gig could have gone if there had been that common understanding?
I think he would have known that, I just wasn't in in the right frame of mind,
Mhm.
because I love all my, like, duo partners, and I feel
Yeah.
like we all get along well, and we all have good chemistry, and I
Mhm.
felt like that night the chemistry was just off a little bit, and
Mm.
so we had, like, an issue with the microphones, like, I was using his microphone, and I think, like, the way that I had talked about it, because I was off and I wasn't my normal self,
Right.
and
Right.
he didn't know, like,
You
what
didn't
had
have the
happened
context, right? Yeah.
right before that, that he thought I was upset with him, and I'm like,
Oh,
"No,
yeah.
no, I'm not upset with you."
Yeah.
And I think it was just because, like I said, all
Yeah.
of my duo partners, we have a pretty good chemistry, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
he
yeah.
knew something was off, and so
Yeah.
I think him thinking that I was maybe upset with him because of that, and it totally wasn't,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
he misconstrued, like, I was, like, a little upset
Yeah.
with him,
Yeah. Yeah,
just
it's
because
really
we were just
interesting.
off.
'Cause it was
Yeah,
just off, yeah, so the quick check-in, that's a great example of how a quick check-in with whatever is the present components of the creative situation are. If that's you in your studio and you're sitting at your desk and it's like, "Wow, this is a little messy for me, like, I need to just organize this pile over here,"
yeah,
or
mhm,
or if
yeah.
it's like yeah, or if it's like, like bringing out something that, "Hey, I'm processing something. I really had a hard day at work, and there's nothing you need to do to fix it, but I just wanna let you know if something seems off, like, that's probably what it is,
Yeah,
and
mhm,
I'm holding that, and that's okay." And there's a freedom that comes even in just, like, voicing it, right? Just
yeah,
giving it some words. On the belief side of things, on the internal process belief side of things, the check-in is also very valuable. The check-ins for that can also be a little bit more, take a little bit more, I think, because
mhm,
we carry things around, beliefs about ourselves around all the time, and they just follow us along. It's like a bag over your shoulder, right? It's just something we don't realize a lot of times how heavy a particular belief has been on us until we actually let it go. And so
yeah,
the check in is good for saying, I do feel like something's off. I'm not sure why I keep running into this particular roadblock. Being honest with yourself about those things. Also, like, it's not really a quick check in, but if you're coming up on a really creative period in your life, checking in with a therapist or a counselor is actually a really great way to just get some outside perspective. If you feel like there's a trend in your life, in your creativity, where you're coming up against a brick wall over and over and over
mhm,
again, right?
yeah,
That is a great opportunity to find another creative in your community, to reach out to one of us, right? To reach out to someone that you trust who can just give you some perspective on it. Hey, by the way, I've totally experienced that before. I just experienced it last week. Like, that's what this podcast is about. That's why how Deanna and I started talking, because we realized we were having these common things. So just know, first and foremost, you are
yes.
not alone in this. Creatives, we are notorious for carrying these things around. And that's like why we're talking about it, because it's really important. It's very freeing to be able to have discussions about these things.
And to feel, like, supported in a way.
Hmm.
Oh, maybe validated is a better word. To feel
Yeah, sure.
validated in all of the ups and downs, because this is a roller coaster.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
it's not a rocket that's shooting up and we're heading to the
Mm-mm.
stars, right? It's
Mm-mm.
an up, down.
Yeah.
Super, you're going high up and then whoa,
Right,
really
right, right.
low,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I think sometimes we feel like we're on this roller coaster alone, and we
Yeah.
don't realize that there's a whole there's the whole roller coaster is packed. There are
Right,
other
right,
people
right, right, right.
screaming too,
That's right. That's right. That's
we
funny.
yeah, you
Yeah.
definitely are not alone in this.
Yeah.
And I think having an outlet to be able to talk about that and to
Right.
think about that, I think there's so much that's just brushed,
Yeah.
like, under the
Absolutely.
rug, that we're just supposed to hold in or deal with it,
Mhm.
that I could go through a whole thing,
Yeah.
but I
No, no,
won't.
no.
But
You're
I mean,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Deanna, the other thing I think that's really important is like the concept that we talked about this before about like having grace for yourself,
Yeah.
and really like just setting like reasonable expectations, right? Like
Yeah,
for
that's
your
number 2.
process. Oh, it is. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Like s- it's expectations are different than judgment or attachment. Sometimes they blur together. But a reasonable
Mhm.
expectations is if going into that gig, let's go back to your gig for a second. You know that you're processing this thing that just happened, and you know it's going to take a little while. And so reasonable expectations, right, could be as simple as, you know what, I'm going to tell my co-performer about this before I go on, right? I'm going to get a reasonable expectation could be I'm going to process this in a way that I feel like is productive right now.
Mhm.
Another reasonable expectation could be that I know I'm going to be a little bit off tonight. Like it's the expectations are
Right.
totally up to you, right? So if you're going into like a session, or you've got to do an art class one night or something like that, and so you know that you're processing this heavy thing, and so it's not ideal, and it's not like I don't like going into this situation holding this thing or
And
whatever, or my
sometimes you
studio.
just have to, like, you don't
Yep,
have a
my
choice.
my
Yes.
studio's too messy, but I don't have time to clean it up, whatever it is, right? Understanding that you have the power to give yourself grace and be like, you know what? I'm going to be a little bit off tonight. And that's okay. Right. Like
Mhm.
when we set that up ahead of time, right, we have the ability to both give ourselves grace, because now when we feel like we're off in the middle of the thing, we won't judge ourselves, right? Be like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, but remember,
And then you
I knew
spiral.
this, right? So that's number one. Number two is that we might actually, by giving voice to it and giving ourselves that freedom, we might actually end up surprising ourselves by
Mhm.
outperforming our expectations, right? Which creatives are notorious for. That's one of the things we all love about it, is getting that dopamine hit when we're like, oh my gosh, I made a mistake, and it's like the best thing ever, right?
Yeah.
So I think the expectation piece is really key and is an extension of grace for ourselves. And I think we both, experienced that kind of thing before, when we've had the wherewithal to be like, okay, today's an off day, but I'm going to do it anyway because I love this. Maybe it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and then I
Awesome.
think
And
we
then
have
our
one
last
more takeaway,
one,
right?
yes.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
yeah. This
Don't
is a
be
big one.
attached to the outcome.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what's like an example of that you can think of like practicing this?
For me, I actually think of practicing.
Mm,
So, I talked before in the last episode, maybe I didn't exactly, but I'm classically trained,
mhm,
and piano, for example, I want to read the notes that are on the page. Actually, we had a
mhm,
discussion about this. So, when I right now my goal is to be a little bit more free in what I'm playing,
mhm.
because if I'm trying to read everything, that's going to take me a lot longer to add music to my repertoire.
Like
So,
yeah.
but yeah, so to actually have music with all the notes written out and trying to play
Mhm.
all of those notes, right? That's going to hinder me from adding music because it takes longer to do that, right?
Right.
But let's say I have a piece of music that has a lead sheet. It's a lead
Mhm.
sheet and it has chords, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm not the greatest at reading chords or,
Mm,
improvising
right.
things like that. But when I'm practicing, I have to allow myself enough freedom to try
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
and it not be good. And
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
like, with my voice as well, classically trained, and so I'm stretching
Mhm.
out into other genres that, if I approach it from a classical way, I know exactly what I need to do, how I need to produce the sound. But if I'm working on something that's different, and it's not classical and I need to adjust my sound a little bit, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I have to be, I
Mhm.
mean, I sort of do, but like I don't know
Yeah,
exactly the exact production,
yeah,
the way that I need to produce the sound that I'm
yeah,
looking
yeah,
for and to do it
yeah,
in a healthy way. So I have to kind of experiment a little bit. And sometimes it's not going to sound nice. Like
yeah,
if I'm
yeah.
trying to do like runs or something like that, I could do runs in a
Mhm.
classical piece, but doing runs in a contemporary piece, for me, my brain goes, it's different when it really isn't that
Yeah,
much difference.
yeah,
But,
it's
like
definitely
allowing myself to not sound good.
yeah, yeah, and there's definitely equivalents to that in a lot probably all creative endeavors to some extent, like pottery always looks different until it's finished, right? Like, and if
Mhm.
you're starting out in that world and you're like, why is this not looking the way I want it to look? It's only after it goes through the fire of the furnace with all the finishing and all that that it actually so you're actually building without the visual cue, the full visual cues of what it's going to finally look like. So I'm always fascinated by that. Music is definitely, you're right. Like there's the ability to like play the basics of the song and get through it. And most people would recognize it if you're in like a cover song situation. Whereas like full productions, theater, things like that, like it's really about nailing the song perfectly. And so there's all these different environments creatively
Mhm.
that are probably pretty key. All of the big pieces, this all has to do with when we say non, don't be attached to the outcome. Is really about giving yourself freedom, right? And it's about not judging yourself in the process. Like we are our own worst critics for
Oh
sure,
my goodness.
and so this is setting an intention to not be that, right? And to give yourself space for that, right? Um, so one of the next things we're going to be talking about in the next episode is about how to really like cultivate a creative environment, and this could be the physical things, it could be the life things, the emotional relationships, things like that, the mental space, right? As well as what are those beliefs that we are bringing into the space, and so how do those impact the creative environment. I'm excited about this one because we've
Yeah.
both been in like solo environments as well as group environments, and so we'll talk about that as well. Um, and then really all of it that is in service of building creative flow with ourselves and with each other. And then we'll start to talk about like something I know is very passionate for you, which is like what are the elements we can incorporate into the environment to actually help the process, like organization. What are the aesthetics of the space? Are there any mindfulness practices we can do? Like what are some tangible things we can do to actually craft a very creative space? And by the way, which I look forward to talking about, you are the creative space. So whether you're creating in your
Yes.
office or at church or like in the choir room or in a club or whatever, like your creative space, the way we're thinking of it is
It's
that it is
you.
you, right? And you're bringing it with you. Everything else is kind of superfluous if you can view yourself as kind of the creative dynamo that you are. So I'm really excited about that. I think that'll be a great episode in the future. So
Yes, and if you are watching us on, YouTube, which, we do have some people who are, we would love it if you would subscribe and leave some comments. Let us know what you thought about this episode and if you have experienced any of those things. And then if you are listening to us on our podcast, our audio podcast, if you could rate and review us, that would be absolutely awesome. So we just
awesome.
want to thank you guys for being with us today, and we'll
Yeah.
see you next time. Bye.
All right. Take care.